Hello everyone and welcome to Starscream's Ghost, a Transformers podcast, your episode-by-episode podcast guide through the classic Transformers Generation 1 cartoon and now Japanese anime continuity. I am Jeremy Graves and joining me as per usual, as today we are fighting for defences of various planets and various systems in various ways, it is of course my partner in crime, Mr. Andy Hanley. Good sir, how are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm doing very, very well. I was going to try and find some kind of Beehive behave play on words, but I can't do it. So write your own, people.
That's how it goes, folks. If you are a first-time listener, first of all, thank you very much for giving us a chance. We hope you enjoy the show. Just calling it like it is, we are way knee-deep into Transformers Headmasters. You can go back through the archives of the podcast on whatever podcast platform you found, or if you're watching us on YouTube, hey YouTube, how's it going? You can find all the episodes that we have talked about in the archives of the podcast and get caught up accordingly. Because today, when it comes to the episodes that we are talking about, it is episodes 19 and 20 of the Transformers Headmasters series, which have the following titles: Fight to the Death on Planet Beehive, and Battle for the Defense of the False Planet. Bit of a mouthful, that second one, but there you go. So I guess before we go any further, Andy, and we should also make a note that if you are a first-time listener / viewer to this podcast, the way that we're watching these episodes is behind me. If you're watching the video version, about there, we are watching the old DVD set that was released in the UK of the Transformers Headmasters series from circa 2004-2005, but also the entire series is on YouTube, so if you just search for it, you can find the entire series. Join us how you see fit. Andy, the two episodes we've got today, we knew going in, based on the last podcast where various things occurred and such, that we knew we were starting a new arc. We probably had a feeling, okay, it might be sort of equivalent of Monster of the Week type stuff. How did you feel watching these two episodes we are going to be discussing today?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the first time this series has really felt like it is that kind of Monster of the Week kind of fare. Like, these two episodes, they kind of stand alone within the broader kind of scheme of this arc. They have a kind of similar makeup. This is probably the closest we've got to that feel of the sort of, you know, your generic sort of G1 episodes from the US run, where it's just like, okay, yeah, you know, insert power source here, Decepticons go to try to steal it, Autobots try to stop them, something happens, Decepticons escape, credits roll, then we come back and do it again next week. And so, yeah, these episodes are both very much of that ilk. And, yeah, they're kind of mostly pretty unspectacular. Like, there's nothing terrible about them. Like, they're not Kremzik or anything. But, you know, there's not really a whole lot to get your teeth into either, to be honest. Which is probably like, you know, everyone's probably hitting the stop button on this podcast now I've said that. I should have bigged them up and said, no, they're great. Let's tell you why. But no, they're pretty middle of the road.
I think that's a very fair assessment. That being said, though, there are a couple of things that they do within these episodes, which, especially comparing to US G1, just for want of a better phrase, they do some very interesting things, and there are little seeds planted of things that may come back later in the series that have a big impact. They tease a few things later on, and also just kind of a recurring character thing, which I think really comes to the forefront based on what we have seen in the past with Chromedome.
Yeah, I mean, there is the thing that I found myself really thinking about off the back of these episodes is that actually, like, it feels like a lot of the focus of this series has been on Chromedome, like over and above the other Headmasters. I mean, with the exception of Fortress, you know, who's, you know, important because he's big.
He literally has big head mode.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, it kind of made me think of like, oh, actually, Chromedome's always kind of center stage, you know, almost literally in terms of the way he's framed in a lot of shots, but he's also like the character that seems to do the most talking. He's kind of the spokesman for the group in pretty much all matters. And I did have this sudden realization getting to spend a little bit of time with sort of Brainstorm, particularly in one of these episodes, of just like, oh, actually, yeah, we kind of don't really get to see a lot of the other characters do that much or say that much. They're normally there to just back up Chromedome or kind of argue with him a little bit and then kind of, you know, things carry on. So yeah, I definitely had that kind of thought off of these episodes, particularly of just like, oh yeah, this is kind of, I'd not really thought about this, but there's definitely something here.
Yeah, it is quite interesting how, especially when we get onto it during this podcast, as to the things that Chromedome does and says, it really is interesting sort of how his character has evolved, which, quite frankly, Andy, a lot of it was telegraphed earlier in the show in hindsight.
Yeah, and I mean, it's, again, to be fair, you know, the character writing in this series has been pretty sound for the most part. So, you know, it's kind of nice to see it at least manages to do some stuff with that.
So from there, let's get on to our first episode of the day. It is episode 19, Fight to the Death on Planet Beehive. Now, I will note that last time on the podcast, when I was reading out the episode titles, on the TF Wiki, it's noted as Fight to the Death on Planet Hive, but in the subtitle script for the DVDs that we're watching, the UK DVD as mentioned earlier, it is specifically called Planet Beehive everywhere, so I may flip-flop back and forth between the two, but just to put that out there now, for the sake of continuity when it comes to listening.
Yeah, and I will say, the planet is a giant beehive, so it is not an inaccurate title to call it Planet Beehive.
So we begin in deep space. The first shot that we see is Scorponok in Scorpion mode travelling along the stars. Dramatic music plays in the background as the narrator says the following. Galvatron leads the Decepticon army aboard Scorponok. They are travelling through space to plunder the energy of prosperous planets. We then cut to the bridge of Scorponok, where Galvatron says, quote-unquote, "There's a bee planet replete with energy. We'll target it." Suddenly, their sensors pick up a ship, and it turns out to be from Planet Beehive, full of the planet's inhabitants. The commander of said inhabitants immediately recognises the Decepticon insignia on Scorponok's hull, tries to turn to flee, but are already being bombarded by laser fire from the Decepticons. As we see this unfold, the narrator informs us, quote-unquote, the Beehive commander calls for reinforcements from Mother Planet. But then, we just see the ship being blown to pieces, quite frankly. The Decepticons just leave their mess and begin their journey, or continue their journey, I should say, to Planet Beehive. We then get a scene change, with the narrator informing us. Meanwhile, Maximus and the Autobot warriors follow Galvatron on Battle Station Maximus to prevent them from plundering energy. A random note that, for some reason, the subtitle script on this episode, Andy, did like to say Battle Station Maximus and then Battleship at various points, so that was a weird continuity thing.
Yeah, indeed.
But continuing. I mentioned the word continuity for a second ago. A little continuity note here, Andy, that when the previous episode ended, we saw Maximus leaving Earth and didn't really have a total grasp on who exactly was going to be going on this space mission. But based on this episode, we immediately got confirmation of who is on board Maximus. Obviously, Fortress, in big head mode when the episode begins. There's also Twincast, RC, the 4 Autobot Headmasters, that being Chromedome, Hardhead, Brainstorm, and I wrote Hardhead again because I've forgotten the other one, so good job, Jeremy.
Highbrow.
Thank you, that's the one. And then plus, of course, Daniel and Wheelie. Now, I'm going to say this now, folks. Remember that, because there may be other Transformers involved in another episode we're going to talk about who just randomly appear. But continuing. Though it's not immediately clear how much time has passed since the opening scene we discussed where the Beehive ship was destroyed, Battleship Maximus happens upon the ruins of that spaceship. Chromedome decides to just fly into space to investigate the remains. And upon looking inside, we see the devastation and destruction of the wreckage. There are silhouettes of dead bodies aplenty, but there is someone alive, who somehow manages to sneak up on Chromedome and is ready just to blast his face off because he suspects he is a Decepticon. He's about to pull the trigger, but then Chromedome confirms that he's actually an Autobot and takes the soldier back to Maximus for medical attention. We cut to the infirmary on Maximus. RC is tending to the soldier. The narrator then tells us, quote-unquote, the soldier told them about the planet of the bees. The planet Beehive is a peaceful planet ruled by Queen Bee. Its citizens are hard-working and collect energy from space. Internal affairs are governed by a parliament. During the narrator's dialogue, we get a glimpse of the planet, showing off a vague similarity. I mean, I've said vague, Andy. It is a similarity to a honeycomb surface on top of the planet. But underground, there is a vast city landscape with a prominent structure in the middle. The narrator continues. The Queen rules from a castle floating in a sea of energy. We then see inside the castle and a soldier informing the Queen, sat on her throne of course, of the Decepticons' impending arrival. She immediately tells her soldier to deploy the defense systems and recall all vessels from space. Quote unquote, we must not let one Decepticon get through. Just to pause there for a second, Andy, because I appreciate I have said a heck of a lot there. A lot has happened in the first few scenes of these episodes, but one thing I actually like, even though it is very much a Monster of the Week storyline, I feel they've done a good job of just establishing where we're at, where we're going to, this Beehive planet. They've just done a good job of just setting things up. And I appreciate I motored through all of that, but at this point in the episode, I'm just thinking, alright, cool, I'm into this.
Yeah, I mean, they didn't have to do that. Like, you know, think of all the sort of random planets that we've landed on in sort of G1 Transformers, where either it's a very kind of high level, kind of high concept, kind of, oh, this is the planet of whatever, and it doesn't go into it too much. Like, you know, there are some really good ones, as like, you know, the Web World I really kind of enjoyed. There was, I forget the name of the planet where it kind of got quite deep on the politics, and that was a really good kind of G1 episode.
Oh, was that the one from the God Gambit?
Yes, that's the one. But you know, there was a lot of episodes that were kind of forgettable. It's just like, oh yeah, we just needed a planet to put this on, and that's kind of it. Whereas this is, the whole kind of B concept is kind of fun and works really well in terms of like energy collection, because it's like, yeah, sure, they're kind of collecting the nectar of the universe, you know, to be poetic about it, and you know, it goes for it with that, and yeah, like it kind of, it sells you on the fact of like, okay, this is an interesting planet with interesting inhabitants. They're not just kind of there as just like window dressing, although they also kind of are, but you know, it at least gives them a bit of agency and kind of makes you care at least somewhat in what's becoming of them shortly.
Another thing this episode has already done, which will play into something that's going to happen soon, is they've established that death definitely happens in this episode, because I mentioned it during my recap, but we literally see dark silhouettes of dead bodies floating. And we've had a little bit of inference of death in the show so far, this Headmasters series specifically, but nothing just outright obvious as that, from what I recall.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly not been quite as overt as, yeah, we certainly get, you know, later in this episode, well, not even much later, but like, you know, we get right into it, and yeah, like it definitely, it's we've sort of talked about this a bit before, of that sort of, you know, Japanese kids media have a very different relationship with depicting this kind of stuff to your average, you know, US or kind of UK cartoon that always shied away from that kind of stuff, and you know, it does add a little something to it.
So let's continue, because then we can sort of elaborate a bit more on what we meant by that. We cut back to Maximus, and the Headmasters are discussing the fact that Beehive likely won't survive an attack from the Decepticons. This is when Daniel comes running in, and tells Chromedome that the soldier that he saved is calling for him. To say that it's obvious the situation has taken a turn for the worse is a bit of an understatement. This soldier is really not doing well. He himself confirms what we, the viewer, are thinking at this point by telling Chromedome, quote unquote, I've had it, I can't be saved.
Yeah, although, yeah, to be fair, before that point, he kind of seemed alright. Like, there's this point, like, not to suggest that RC's, like, you know, triage was not the greatest, but, like, he didn't seem that badly hurt until after she tended to him, and so he's like, no, I'm dead, sorry. So yeah, I don't know, like, maybe RC's bedside manner is best suited to Autobots and not I was going to say humans, but not bee people specifically. I mean, who knows?
Not organic life form, how about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, who knows, like, you know, who knows how bee people's, you know, organs work and stuff like that. I mean, probably just a stab in the dark as to how all of that goes, so.
Yeah, now you mention it, that is interesting. Part of me wonders if this is me trying to put two and two together and maybe making 25 as usual, but what if it's like he was on just like a massive adrenaline rush and maybe it had just worn off, and then it can happen. We've all been there at some point, had that massive surge of adrenaline, and you just get like the equivalent of a sugar crash.
Yeah. I mean, who knows? Like, this was sadly this is an episode of Transformers and not Casualty. Otherwise, I'm sure we would have had like some in-depth medical discussion about what happened to the bee person. But we'll have to. We can only speculate.
Bring back Ratchet. Actually, wait, is Ratchet still alive technically in this timeline?
I think Ratchet died on the spaceship in Transformers the movie. He was one of the first to go, I think.
Yeah, I was just wondering in the context of this Japanese timeline if technically he may still be alive. But you know what?
Yeah, maybe.
I won't dwell on that now.
I'll tell you who they do have. They could have brought First Aid along, like they have
Good
Defensor.
point!
I mean, it's kind of weird. I mean, given that they're chasing Galvatron across the galaxy, like this we're sidebarring here, but it is a strange kind of crew that they've taken. Like, you'd have thought you'd take one of the Gestalts, right? You'd take Superion or Defensor, or like one of the big combiner teams. And I mean, it doesn't seem like a small shuttle. It doesn't seem like Fortress is particularly space limited in terms of how many people they could carry. So it's like, surely you kind of have a bit more. And like, Defensor would have been useful because then you've got First Aid as a kind of an actual medical professional in case there are any injuries. And, you know, there's generally a useful crew there. It does feel like they've limited themselves a bit by taking Daniel and Wheelie instead.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that. I mean, that said, we do get a combiner that randomly appears in the next episode, which we'll get on to. But honestly, I'm going to be brutal on how I'm going to say this, Andy. It's the older toy.
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously, yeah, that's the actual answer to this. It's like, we're here to push the Headmasters. We don't want anyone else getting in the way unless we really have to. But you know, from a strategic point of view, I would have suggested that they take a combiner team, and I would have said Defensor.
You can imagine the writers' room. It's going to be like, oh, they're going into space. We could take all the aerial bots, take the protector bots, and upper management just went, how about just the train bots?
Yeah, I mean, you can imagine, yeah, I would be that one guy in the writers' room where nobody else cares about stuff like this. It's like, it's a kid's cartoon, these are the toys we've got to sell, and I'd just be like, yes, but strategically, the Autobots should be taking these guys.
Or maybe at this point when the show's being made, they just said, did you not see what happened in America with Transformers the movie? Like, let's not just throw these people to the dust.
Yes, indeed.
Continuing with the story. The injured soldier hands Chromedome a pendant. It's got an insignia of a bee on it, and requests that Chromedome give it to his son on planet Beehive. We hear that his son is the same age as Daniel, and his name is Mac. Spelt M-A-K-K, or pronounced Maku in Japanese.
Yeah. And I've got to admit, I thought initially he was called Mark, and I was like, that's a really low-key name for a bee person, and I was greatly amused. So I was almost disappointed to realise that it was Mac afterwards, because it's like, I don't know, I was just very amused that his name was just going to be Mark for the whole thing.
Then Andy, the bee person dies.
He does.
That's basically the length of time it took for him to perish.
And in proper, like, Optimus Prime in the movie fashion, he just goes all grey and stuff, which is, like, I guess now the canon of what happens to beings when they die in this, like, particular universe. So that's useful to know, I guess.
Yeah, that's actually a point I wanted to bring up, because I was trying to think of perhaps the timeline on this, because this episode aired in December 1987. And obviously we know that Toei animated Transformers the movie, which had not been in Japan at this point. So the fact that, in essence, they kind of brought over an American continuity element into the Japanese continuity, it's actually a kind of a cool little Easter egg in that sense, like kind of the if you know, you know. But the turning grey thing, with it now happening on an organic life form, it actually really does add a lot of impact. And obviously, we know, from the Optimus Prime point of view, it freaking added a lot of impact, especially crushing children's psyches more than anything. But from this perspective, I actually really liked that fact, and just that small little bit of consistency between the two continuities is something I got a bit of a kick out of.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder if it's... I'd be interested. This would be one of those like great kind of bonus features if you could track down the animators on this show to be like, is this sort of a general, like, is this a kind of non-distressing to kids way of showing that somebody or something has died. Like, you know, rather than have the more sort of like, you know, teenage sort of older kids like anime of like blood flowing out of their mouths or whatever, just to be like, no, we need to show that this person dies, but we need to do it in a kind of, you know, low impact and less violent way. And it's like, well, what if they just go grey and just like their life drains out of them? So yeah, like I wonder how much of that is like the animators saw the reference materials for the movie and was just like, yeah, okay, well, we'll just keep with that, or whether this is a more general like animation / anime thing of like, well, this is a good way of depicting this in a way that is not going to get phone calls to the TV station being like, what you did to my son. Although, if we're talking about distress, once again, poor Daniel, right at the forefront there of all the death and devastation. There's somebody else, like, their life slipping away right in front of him.
Hey, look, he wanted to go on this space trip. He demanded it.
They did warn him that this might happen.
At this point, this is his fault that he's witness to this. But continuing. We then cut back to the orbit of planet Beehive, where Scorponok has arrived, and Galvatron says that Sixshot and the 2 Horicons, Snapdragon and Apeface, will accompany him to the planet's surface, or I should say underground, technically. Interestingly, when the Decepticon Headmasters ask what they're going to be doing, the Horicons respond by basically just saying, why not take a nap?
Yeah, like we're the new toys in town.
Exactly. And then I think Mindwipe specifically responds with, I'll be annoyed if you mess it up. So it's an interesting little tidbit there, and I think that we're going to get a little bit more on that very, very shortly, actually. So I'll carry on, then we can maybe discuss that a bit more. So there's already a little bit of one-upmanship between the Horicons and the Decepticon Headmasters, or you could say potential dissension between the Headmasters and the Horicons there. This is emphasised a scene or two later when we see the Decepticon Headmasters speaking with each other while everyone else is down on the planet, and they claim that Galvatron underrates their power. When Mindwipe then talks to Scorponok, he just says, look, let's just go down and run amok on the planet. Scorponok tells them to wait, specifically saying, quote-unquote, the time to show our true power will soon come. Until then, just obey Galvatron's orders. So when I mentioned when I mentioned earlier, that's what I was trying to say, Andy, that there was a little hint of things to come. This is one of those hints, in that clearly Scorponok is of the mindset of, all right, I'm a bust for a while, bide my time, just play it cool, my time will come, sort of thing. And this little bit of dissension, it's a cool little thing that I'm wondering, are we in essence going to get a little bit of a Decepticon Civil War type battle later in the show now?
Yeah, because I mean, we've kind of talked about this in previous episodes, that, you know, the return of sort of Galvatron precipitates this weird, awkward sort of Mexican standoff between Scorponok and Galvatron of just like, there's a clear pecking order in terms of who is the Emperor of Destruction here. As Galvatron would have it. And, you know, but Scorponok clearly has designs on that and kind of feels like he should really be the boss. So clearly there was always going to be a point where this comes to loggerheads, and the fact that Scorponok / Zarak was being so kind of, you know, taking a back seat so readily wasn't going to last. So yeah, I suspect this is probably going to be one of the things that rumbles on through this arc. Not Rumble the Transformer, but more generally rumbles on. Because yeah, like clearly he has a plan. He's not just going to be like, yeah, okay, cool, Galvatron's in charge now. I'm just gonna be a taxi forever. You know, there's going to be a tipping point on that. So yeah, that's clearly setting the scene for whatever is going to come once we've had our bit of planet hopping.
So we then see the 4 Decepticons leave Scorponok, that being Galvatron's Sixshot and the Horicons, and they fly towards planet Beehive. We then cut to the Queen's chamber, and we find out through dialogue that not all of the ships that were off-planet have been able to return in time. Because of this, when you look at the planet's surface, you kind of see a lot of, like, access tunnels, is one way to phrase it, that actually lead to the city underground. They cannot be closed because the ships had not returned. And what we then see is basically just the Decepticons just fly through without any issue whatsoever. Galvatron himself basically just seeing one of the defense ships that eventually turns up and just blasts it with his arm cannon. Just reminding us of how powerful he is. But the fact they had very little resistance kind of indicates, yeah, this planet's going to need a bit of help.
Yeah, and it's kind of... There was a point where I thought maybe that wasn't going to be the case, because there are kind of shots in this episode where you kind of see this sort of massed fleet of Beehive spaceships, and you're like, oh, maybe they can actually hold their own. Like, they definitely have the Decepticons outnumbered in terms of sheer weight of numbers. And then, yeah, it very quickly becomes clear that, like, no, that really doesn't matter. This is going to be something of a massacre.
So the city's children are evacuated to the Queen's castle per her orders. The narrator saying, quote unquote, "At once the children made their way to the castle through a secret passage." However, we the viewer see that one young boy is unable to follow, and is caught on the battlefield, nearly being struck by falling debris in the process. Back in space, the returning Hive ships that we were alluding to a second ago have now conveniently arrived in the planet's orbit, and they cross paths with Battleship Maximus. Mistakenly, they think that Maximus is a Decepticon, and open fire. Now, Hardhead is in favour of returning the sentiment, but Fortress refuses, and then Chromedome, Hardhead, and Brainstorm have the bright idea of flying out of Maximus into the path of the lasers to try and make the Hive soldiers realise the truth. Now, there is some very epic dialogue, Andy, that emphasises the way they try to do this. Allow me to regale you with some quotes. Chromedome begins with, "We're not Decepticons! We're Autobots!" And even that epic line, Andy, is met with failure, as the Beehive ships just think, we're not going to fall for that, that's just a trick. And then we get other dialogue from the Autobots, ranging from, "Believe us, we're not your enemies!" And then, of course, Andy, the ultimate line demonstrating they failed, of just being, "Why don't they understand?" Suffice to say, the Headmasters failed poorly here.
Yeah, and to be fair, there was a pretty high bar to succeeding in this, given everything that's happened up to this point. So it's like, yeah, you're not really gonna win people over quite that easily.
You know, couple of planets got destroyed and whatnot, you know. So as all this is happening, there is a small but interesting Beehive-specific character development that's established here. The Queen is wondering if the Autobots may indeed be friendly, as they're not resisting the attack being thrown at them, but one of her guards in her chambers responds with, quote, "They're Transformers just like the Decepticons. They want to steal our energy. They'll show their true colours soon enough." Now, the reason I bring this up, Andy, is because it's a small insight, potentially, but do you reckon, in the context of where things are at in this universe, that is just the overall perception of Transformers in the galaxy at this point?
Yeah, I mean, I would certainly expect so. I mean, again, this is one of those weird things of, like, coming from the comics continuity, where that was always, like, the default. That was an ongoing theme throughout of, you know, the idea of what, like, well, they're all the same, and, like, most humans would look at would not look at the insignia, they just look at the big robot and be like, well, this is bad. You know, even Ronald Reagan, you know, ultimately decided that the Autobots and Decepticons were no different. So yeah, there's a good Transformers story for you. But yeah, I've that's the way I've always thought of it, is that, like, in general, unless people are directly involved with both factions and get to see the two sides for themselves, they just look at it as just like, yeah, Transformers bad, and that's kind of the end of it.
Now, following on from this, we come to see that Fortress is insistent on sticking to his plan, i.e. not resisting, and saying that they will continue to just stand here and be shot at, quote unquote, until they understand. I don't know if I agree with your plan, Fortress, but we then get what I wrote down, Andy, as a very firm conversation between Chromedome, and, quite frankly, just Chromedome and everyone else. Because Fortress says to defeat the Decepticons, we must win the trust of the people. We need their cooperation. I'll be straight, Andy. That actually kind of reminded me that type of dialogue of Optimus Prime, so I was really glad to kind of see a line like that. Just saying, we need to let them trust us. We can't force this on them.
Yeah. See, I mean, I was thinking more about the universal greeting, and surely they should just give the bee people an energon goodie and say, "Bah weep grana weep ninny bong." But I mean, again, I guess movie continuity question mark here.
Oh, that's a shame. I've just now you said that, it's made me think. Oh, that's not part of the continuity now, is it?
Yeah. So,
that's harsh. So, Fortress has just said that line, and Chromedome, clearly not understanding how to listen to his commander, refuses to go along with his commander's strategy. As I described it, like a child, he just turns away from Fortress and crosses his arms, having a bit of a tantrum. Then he runs out and heads down to planet Beehive on his own. Fortress, very much once again reminding me of the times when Optimus Prime had to deal with the younger Autobots back in the US continuity, says, Chromedome doesn't act without thinking.
And I actually quite like that as his like retort, to like not be annoyed about it or not to be just just leave him to it. He's just like, no, clearly he's thought of something, he's got a plan, so let's just see what he's gonna do and maybe it'll work out. Like, it's kind of I mean, it becomes a key like pillar of this episode is just like talking about trust, and like that's kind of the theme here of just like, no, like clearly he doesn't trust me, but I trust him, and so I'm sure it'll be fine.
Now, of course, Chromedome gets to the planet almost as easily as the Decepticons, sans all the laser fire about the place. He then explores the planet in vehicle mode, and Chromedome is determined to find the son of the dead soldier, Mac, to give him his now deceased father's pendant. Now, he by chance encounters that stranded young boy that we saw earlier, and decides to speak to him. Now, at this point, like I said, Chrono's in vehicle mode, so it's kind of his... It's the small Chromedome part of him, like the head, if you will, transformed at speaking. Now, keep in mind what's happened earlier in this episode, as the following conversation unfolds. I read you a transcript. Chromedome says, "Hey, do you know a boy called Mac?" The boy responds with, "I'm Mac." Chromedome says, "Huh? You're Mac? Oh, it's lucky I found you. I'm Chromedome, an Autobot Headmaster. I was asked to give you this." He hands the boy the pendant. Mac says, "This is the Medal of Valor my father got from the Queen. Is my father..." And then Chromedome just responds with, "Your father died in battle against the Decepticons."
Yep.
And then we see Mac drop the pendant. His life is shattered. He's unquestionably upset. Starts crying, bawling his eyes out. And Chromedome just stands there. And does nothing.
Yeah,
I think the scene fades to black and it's like, what the hell, Chromedome?
Look, Chromedome's busy. He's got a lot going on right now. He has no time for this. I do like how matter of fact it is. It's like, is my father like, yeah, he's dead. Like, now can we move on, please? It's like, I mean, maybe a little more compassion would not go amiss here.
It's like, your father's dead. Come on, time is energon. Time is energon. You know.
Yeah. It's like, come on, I've got things to do. I've got a date with RC later. I can't hang around.
We'll come back to her later. So we then get a very quick scene change with the narrator saying, "Mac believed Chromedome and led him to the castle to see the Queen." And there's me thinking, we've missed a very big conversation here. I want to know how Chromedome made this happen.
I was gonna say, a very big conversation, or just a lot of crying and just like Mac not really caring, just like, whatever, just leave me alone.
Mac helps Chromedome get an audience with Queen Bee to prove the Autobots' goodwill. Chromedome manages to convince the Queen that he and the other Autobots are in fact here to help, a revelation that is punctuated by the Decepticons' arrival at the doors of the castle, having decimated pretty much all the planet's military force. So much so that we see Galvatron complaining the battle was too short. Now, as they approach the castle, Andy, the Queen comes to the balcony to address Galvatron, and the conversation unfolds as follows. Galvatron says, "Your Majesty, I'm Galvatron, Emperor of Destruction. You have energy stockpiled on this planet. You will surrender it to us." Queen Bee responds with, "I can't do that." Galvatron just says, "What do you mean you can't?" Queen Bee says, "Our planet's energy was collected from outer space by citizens and is the fruit of our considerable labours. I will not surrender it to you." Galvatron responds with, "In that case, we'll just take your hard-working citizens as our slaves," and then proceeds to open fire on the palace. Chromedome then appears and says, "Wait, Galvatron, you haven't counted on me." Galvatron then responds with, "The Autobots, they always appear before you know it." Chromedome immediately attacks them and transforms into vehicle mode to try and lead them away. Galvatron just sends the Horrorcons after him, stating, "I want you to get rid of him." Now, as Chromedome tussles with the Horrorcons, which brings about our quota of slapstick comedy involving the Decepticons landing on each other for this episode, there is a battle that takes place in the air, and for a brief second, Andy, I genuinely thought I was watching something which was kind of a parody of Dragon Ball Z, because we had people avoiding each other's attacks in the sky and whatnot. Kind of like, the very quick movement in the air. It was quite funny in retrospect.
Yeah, there's definitely perhaps some influence from Dragon Ball. Who can say?
But I digress. So Chromedome is actually, you know what? No, I'm not going to digress. I actually wrote this down. I said Goku is playing the part of Goku, which, as a character choice, Andy, isn't actually too bad of a comparison. Kind of just goes in first, asks questions later. Maybe doesn't plan properly. Perhaps just thinks about what he wants more than anything. So, I'm calling it now. Chromedome is Goku in a different timeline.
I mean, yeah. Why not? Again, this is maybe where we get to the TF Wiki and find that there's some figure that's some kind of Dragon Ball Transformers crossover that we don't know about. Stranger things have happened.
I would love if that had happened. We will find out later if that may be a thing. So, Galvatron is getting annoyed with how long this battle is taking. So he and Sixshot transform and shoot Chromedome into what was described earlier by the narrator as the Sea of Energy. And of course, Mac was watching this battle next to the Queen, so he now has had to not only hear about his father dying, but has also essentially just kind of seen Chromedome perish before his eyes. He is now having a good day, much like Daniel does on a regular basis. Now, during that battle, Galvatron summons Scorponok down to the planet to press with the attack. With Chromedome now beaten, the Queen Bee contacts Battleship Maximus. Having called off the attack in space, she references that Chromedome has told her about them, and calls upon the Autobots for help. Fortress's response is, "Tell Chromedome not to do anything rash until we get there." My immediate thought, too late! In the midst of the ensuing battle, we see Scorponok literally bashing the Queen's castle, which is a really fun visual. And the Decepticon Headmasters are now involved as well, just causing havoc all over the place. Now, Andy, remember how I mentioned that Chromedome fell into the sea? Well, the narrator confirmed my suspicion of what was going to happen next, because as we see the seemingly lifeless body of Chromedome on the ocean floor, the narrator says, "Chromedome was regaining strength in the Sea of Energy." And then we, the viewers, see Mac appear, trying to wake him up. Maximus has now arrived on the planet, which means it's time to sell some toys, folks, with transformations aplenty. The Autobot Headmasters immediately get into the action, fighting the Decepticon Headmasters, which involved another fun slapstick moment where Mindwipe was being ping-ponged in between the two Autobot Headmasters flying in the air, which was really random.
Yeah, I don't really know how that works, but it was kind of entertaining to see.
I mean, if you want an animated GIF, Andy, that's the one, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. If we could do animated GIF screen caps for these episodes, that would be it.
Battleship Maximus is exchanging with laser fire with Scorponok. Six-Shot and the Horicons transform numerous times to fight their enemies. And we even get a full transformation of Scorponok, who engages in fighting. Then, Chromedome emerges from the Sea of Energy, having been able to absorb enough energy to re-energize himself. And we also see a moment that sort of implies that Mac being in the sea with Chromedome was sort of helping to channel the energy towards him. I'm not entirely sure what was going on, but it was almost like he had like a divining rod and was just pointing at him.
Yeah, he was Krillin to Chromedome's Goku or something.
There you go. Oh, the references, Andy, we're going to be doing now for the rest of this run. So we have the rejuvenated Chromedome, and now we get a chance to see some combined physical attacks happening, because the Headmasters do a combined attack and get Scorponok off of Battleship Maximus, quite literally. And then Fortress shouts, "Chromedome, this calls for a master shot attack." Now what we get now, everyone, is quite frankly absurd. What we get is the Autobot Headmasters removing the giant cannon on the tower of Battleship Maximus, which turns out to be a giant handgun. The four Headmasters hold the gun, and I'm getting flashbacks to like Season 2 time when either Spike or Carly were trying to shoot a Decepticon handgun just by pushing the trigger with their entire body. The four Headmasters hold the gun and shoot it at Scorponok, and they just basically shoot them and the Decepticons down. Like, it works. Then Fortress literally gets a gleam in his eye and shouts, "Now!" And you cue the opening theme to the show, and we have the pleasure of seeing the transformation sequence of Fortress Maximus, which at this point, Andy, I don't really feel like we've seen it fully in quite a while. It feels like it's been ages.
No, it's definitely been a while, and you know it's serious when you get the opening theme,
So Fortress Maximus with Master Sword in hand, and a little extra help from the Master Shot from the handgun a few moments earlier, he slashes Scorponok across the chest with said Master Sword, forcing the villains to retreat. And as we see them flying away, Scorponok has got a very clear just slash with a giant beam of light emanating from his chest. With the Decepticons having left the planet, we now see Fortress Maximus standing in front of planet Beehive, or kind of, in orbit, if you will. And this is the moment when I thought, you've run out of time to end this episode, haven't you? Because then the narrator says, as we get silhouettes of various characters from planet Beehive and Fortress Maximus and various Autobots and various other people flashing up on screen. By joining forces, the Autobots and the inhabitants of planet Beehive restore peace. Fortress and Chromedome may have disagreed, but now they trust each other. Such trust is one of the greatest strengths of the Autobots. Then the episode ends and we get the ending theme.
Yeah, it was definitely trust that won the day and not the whacking great sword. 100%.
So yeah, basically, we never got like a proper send-off of Planet Beehive, which partly makes me wonder, are we going to see it again? But this episode ended so quickly, Andy. This is the first time in a while, maybe even in this season of the show, where it's very much felt like, crap, we've run out of time, just end it.
Yeah, we've had some episodes that have felt a bit rushed, but this, again, it has that classic weekly episodic kind of feel of just like, yeah, we spent too long on our setup. We didn't really have the time or the animation budget to, go too ham on how all of this resolves. I mean, we literally get a very incredibly cool, like, panning still shot of some of the Decepticon headmasters kind of being attacked and what have you, which actually that was definitely like, oh, they should just make a poster of this because this is a really nice piece of artwork, but it is not animation per se. And then, yeah, we get the whole thing. I will say, your thoughts about the ridiculousness of the headmasters like holding this gun, this giant gun to fire it. Hold that thought for how like things resolve later in this series, because if there's one spoiler that I have for this, there are some far more ridiculous things that the headmasters are going to do to win battles than this.
I am so excited to hear that. I can't wait. And that's the end of the episode, quite frankly. I appreciate we've sort of motored through it, especially by our pace of talking, Andy, in some ways. But that was the episode, and I had fun. I'm just kind of sad we didn't get a proper send-off for Beehive, because there was a lot of interesting concepts in there, which sort of made me thought, you know what, I'd be cool to face that again. That's not the right word I wanted to say. I'd be cool to see that again, and maybe see if they can be brought into the fold a little bit. But I assume it's a one and done. But overall, this episode, it's fine. Nothing offensive in it. Nothing utterly off the wall. But it does have a few little tidbits to further some plot points.
Yeah, it was fine. We will never see Planet Beehive again. I wish I could regale you with some kind of long anecdote about how when I was a kid they had Planet Beehive toys and that this was some tie-in. But sadly, no, there were never, that I'm aware of, please write in if you know differently, there were never any Planet Beehive toys. There's not some kind of other continuity or universe in which you can enjoy their continued adventures. So we will just have to leave them as they are.
Hey, even the Battle Beast showed up twice, you know.
I mean, yeah, exactly. They made good use of that IP, so...
So before we get to the TF Wiki to delve into some notes on there, any other additional notes that you wanted to have, or anything you noticed, anything that just drove you insane, any random animation errors? Because admittedly, on the animation front, this episode was alright, but there were some odd moments of animation. Like at one point, Galvatron was very... pointy. I think he had a very pointy chest at one point.
yeah, it was definitely felt like it was struggling a little bit. Again, there was some. I mean, the explosions were still frames at one point in this, and it's like if there's one thing we know that this series enjoys, it's a good explosion. So when even the explosions are admittedly very beautiful, but still they're still frames, then you know that probably tells you something about the schedule on this episode. I did like you mentioned like kind of Scorponok sort of being slashed and kind of retreating. That also gave me some movie vibes of like when Optimus Prime just gets that big gash in his grill, and he kind of staggers back, and like again not as cool as that in visually, but like it did kind of feel a little bit similar of just like, oh yeah, like that's some nasty damage that you have to like escape from, because that can I was gonna say that can sting, but then that just turns into a B joke, and that wasn't where I was going with this, but I guess I'll run with it now.
I mean, there's a scorpion sting technically.
Also scorpion jokes. I mean, I'm surprised there wasn't like some kind of like stinging battle or some kind of jibe along those lines in this episode. They missed a trick there, if nothing else.
Oh, there you go. So, onto the TF Wiki. Let's see what we have got noted on this. Continuity notes. Hive is the first stop of the Decepticons' interplanetary energy gathering quest. That's a mouthful. Which begun in Daniel faces his biggest crisis ever. The next note. Inhabitants of Hive... here we go. Inhabitants of Hive become drained of colour when they die, not unlike Cybertronians as seen in Transformers the movie, and several early The Headmasters episodes.
Yeah, that definitely happened at least once, if I recall.
I'm trying to remember who that was. I'm sure it probably did happen. I'm not doubting it. I just can't remember at this point who.
Yeah, I
guess
remember.
Technically probably Optimus Prime, right?
Yeah, I think that definitely happened again in front of Daniel, if I recall.
So onto some animation and technical errors, and there's a bunch of things mentioned here, Andy, but I'm going to focus on one specifically. The episode features the first reuse of Fortress Maximus's transformation sequence from the episode Head On Fortress Maximus. Now, as noted in that episode's article, the Autobot insignia on his chest is missing its jaw during the footage. So, yeah, I hadn't actually thought of that, and it's not something we've really talked about in the show when it comes to sort of reuse of footage. It's happened occasionally, but it has only just now occurred to me that is just going to be the same reused bit of footage, and I have zero issue with that. It's like watching a Sentai show. It's like watching other shows that have transformations, or like anime when they do a particular move, as it were. Yeah. I'm all for it.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of my surprise that this is only the second time we've seen it, because I assumed when we had that whole sequence that like, oh, we're going to get this like every week now, or at least like, every other week. And that it's going to be in heavy rotation. Because the entire reason you make those long transformation scenes is to fill space and save on your animation budget in episodes. Like, it's the one thing. It's why they usually get such high budget and so many cuts of animation. Because it's like, hey, we're going to use this a lot, so we'll make it look real nice. And it takes up like 90 seconds of every episode. So yeah, it's kind of weird that this is the first time we've actually had it used since. But no, there you go.
Trivia. So let's see what we got here. The Master Shot attack is a lot more mundane than it sounds. The Headmasters just pull the cannon off the side of the Battleship Maximus' central tower and fire it. The gun, of course, is one of the Fortress Maximus toy's handheld weapons, though Maximus never wields it in robot mode in the Headmasters. That's an interesting little tidbit, isn't it?
yeah. Again, it's one of the things I always find fascinating about this show and Transformers in general is kind of trying to take the toy designs and do stuff with them in a kind of, in this animated setting, because sometimes there's a very clear okay, that's cool, but quite often there are a whole bunch of weapons that the toys have that either kind of get repurposed for the cartoon, or they just don't get used at all because they just don't really make sense in any kind of continuity.
Here's an interesting note. When Chromedome re-energizes himself from the energy moat, the narrator points out that he is doing it with Mac's assistance, and the animation, as I mentioned, seems to indicate that he is holding something that helps the process along. What this is or how it works is not explained, but the TF Wiki says here, perhaps it was intended to be his father's pendant, which would give that whole subplot a point, but nothing has gone into this topic at all.
Yeah, and again, I think this also runs into our kind of lack of time to resolve things in this episode, because I fully suspect that was the general gist of what they were going for. It's kind of surprising Mac helped Chromedome at all, given how he broke the news of his father's demise. But yeah, I think that's what they were going for there. It turns out the pendant was also a wireless charging pad for Chromedome's wireless charging interface, I guess. Handily.
So
hey, did the Transformers invent iPhone wireless charging as well? Is this something we can add to the list?
You know what? Why not? I'm game. They've invented a lot at this point. So, fun little note here, which I'm going to amend the phrasing of it so as to perhaps not give away something later on, but although you might assume that Scorponok immediately retreating after taking one bit of damage is simply a product of 1980s Saturday morning cartoon villain logic, there's actually a bit more to it than that, and it will be revealed later in the series. So there you go.
Okay, maybe is this a football? Has he done his hamstring or something? He's just gonna have recurring injury problems for the rest of the series.
I will tell you, we're not far away from seeing the reveal of what that is. It may be in a couple of podcasts' time, but it's something we can look forward to, I suppose.
Interesting.
So, foreign localization, buddy. First of all, English. The Omni Productions dub called the episode The War on the Hive Planet. Oh, this is... okay, just when you thought you couldn't get weirder notes, alright. The Omni Productions name for the episode is listed on the dialogue script as The War on the Boeing Planet. Sure. Galvatron states that the Hive ship is leading them back to the planet, despite the ship clearly exploding in the previous shot.
Yeah, maybe they just got a general vibe of where it was going and they just followed that direction, I guess.
The Shout Factory US DVD subtitle name for the episode was Fight to the Death on Planet Beehive, as per our UK set. The Spanish dub called the episode War on the Boeing Planet. In Italian, it was The Hive Planet, and in Mandarin, it was The Battle on the Hive Planet. Now, there is one additional note here, Andy, which is actually in the animation and technical errors section. In the Latin dub of this episode, the Hive pilots identify the Decepticon insignia as the Autobots. And then it also says, later, Daniel says to Fortress that, quote-unquote, one of the injured soldiers wants to talk to him. When there is clearly just one soldier. So there you go. It's not just Omni Productions that have a bad time with this sometimes.
Yep, indeed.
So that's all of that particular episode, good sir. Any final thoughts before we move on to episode 20?
No, I think let's move on.
Well, from there then, we advance to episode 20 of Transformers Headmasters. Battle for Defense of the False Planet. We begin with Scorponok flying through space, passing by, and narrowly missing, it should be said, some asteroids, with the narrator saying, quote-unquote, "In his quest for domination of the universe, Galvatron continues his search for more energy." Now, on the bridge, we the viewers see that some of the Headmasters are having a good laugh at the fact that a lot of the asteroids are getting really close to Scorponok, but Scorponok is narrowly avoiding them. This is when Sixshot informs Galvatron they will soon be entering Twin Star airspace. Galvatron's response to this is, quote-unquote, "You won't believe the enormous energy reserves that lie there." Scorponok responds with, "Lord Galvatron." I don't know why I've gone very posh with that, but just roll with it, people. "Lord Galvatron, don't waste your time gathering energy. It's better to complete the master plan." Galvatron responds with, "Are you still opposed to it, Scorponok?" "I'm not against it," says Scorponok, "but I don't want to waste our strength." Sixshot then comes into the conversation and says, "Aren't we on a quest for energy to complete our plan?" Galvatron says, "Exactly, don't worry, just look forward to the fruits of our efforts." And then Scorponok adds, "I'd like to put an end to it once and for all." So a little bit of something brewing there, Andy, little bit. Now, it's interesting to note that in the previous episodes, in the previous recent episodes, I should say, we've seen Scorponok's voice be sort of a semblance of an all-encompassing godlike voice when inside transport mode Scorponok. But here, Andy, there is a clear distinction. Because on the bridge, if you will, Scorponok's voice is emanating from what looks like a crystal inside a jar of some kind. Kind of like a domed glass, as it were. It's a bit weird, but I'm all for it. It's a cool little thing.
Yeah, it's more just kind of strange how that's changed somewhat, but like, I don't know, maybe they've just got like an Alexa, and that's just like Transformers Alexa or something that can just, just voice activated, like, "Hey, Scorponok, take us to the nearest energy planet."
So we mentioned the Twin Star system. The Decepticons basically arrive at it, and what we see are two planets really freaking close to each other. And as we'll come to find out, they are named Sperity and Toluin. Now, it should be noted, on the TF Wiki, they note it as Toruin, which I guess is just a pronunciation thing, but they are two distinct planets, but they are very close in how they are orbiting each other, Andy? Is that one way to put it, I guess?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure whether they're orbiting one another or like what the configuration is here, but yeah, they're in close configuration.
Now, the planet realise that the Decepticons are nearby and are trying to hail them and get them to stop coming closer and whatnot. But the Decepticons just advance, and they go down to the surface, and there's planetary defences, which have no hope of outwitting the Decepticons, quite frankly. And Galvatron's reaction to their defences is simply, resistance is futile.
Yeah, I did like how many times they just asked them to stop, like, approaching the planet. It was very much a British police stop or I'll shout stop again kind of moment, which was kind of funny. And then yeah, like it's one of those weird things. I always kind of get a kick when there's like these sort of defenses or whatever kick in, and Scorponok doesn't even bother trying to evade any of it. It's just like, whatever. This is just tickling me, basically. There's always something fun about that, where like the missile systems or the laser systems or whatever are just so weak that it's just like, this doesn't actually even affect me at all.
Now, I mentioned sort of a few minutes later a second ago. Now, this is because in between these scenes that we've just been talking about, we check in on the Autobots on Battleship Maximus, the narrator saying, quote, "Meanwhile, Fortress and the Autobots are aware of Galvatron's ambitions and are pursuing him to Twin Star." However, now, we kind of alluded to this in the episode we just talked about, Andy, but it's been a recurring theme, and once again in this episode in particular, that all may not necessarily be well in the Autobot Headmasters camp, more specifically relating to Chromedome, and maybe the morale not being as you want it to be. After Daniel is talking to Fortress about how fast Maximus is and he's sure that they'll catch up with the Decepticons in time, the following, advance warning lengthy, dialogue exchange takes place. Fortress says, and this is to Daniel and Wheelie, he's saying this, "You both think this is an adventure?" Daniel says, "No, I want us to get to Galvatron quickly." Fortress responds back with, "You have to be aware of the dangers." Chromedome then says, "Commander, how long do you want to shadow them?" Them being the Decepticons. Fortress says, "It depends on Galvatron's attitude." Very weird phrase, but there you go. Chromedome responds with, "There are no other planets around to plunder." Fortress says, "What are you trying to say?" "Silently shadowing them is not what a warrior should do," says Chromedome. Hardhead then chips in and says, "Yeah, it's better to get rid of them now." Chromedome comes back in and says, "We can hit them hard here in deep space." Fortress then says, "Can you be sure of victory?" "Huh?" responds Chromedome. "Can we beat them without making sacrifices?" says Fortress. Chromedome then says, "Well..." Then Brainstorm comes into the conversation and says, "You lot, is fighting the only thing you guys can think of?" Chromedome, now getting irked, just says, "What?" Brainstorm saying, "Fighting is an art." And Hardhead then chips in and goes, "An art?" Brainstorm then says, "Use your head and fight with style. Then you win with style. Brute force is for idiots." Then Chromedome says, "Damn you!" and launches at Brainstorm. And then Brainstorm just says, "It's also idiotic to lose your temper." Now, the reason I regaled in all of that dialogue, Andy, is because this is the most we have seen what I will call arguing or dissension among the Autobot Headmaster team, if you will, at any point in the show so far. I don't know if this is going to have any more bearing, because seemingly in every episode so far, they've kind of gone, "Oh, we have a bit of a squabble, we're fine for a bit after, you sort of worked it out." They kind of imply in this episode later on, not to be a massive spoiler, that this might be all okay now. But I do wonder if at some point this is going to lead to a big plot development, but I honestly don't know.
Yeah, I mean, possibly. And I think if nothing else, it gives an opportunity, like I was saying up the top, that it gives an opportunity for the personalities of the various Headmasters to kind of show through a little bit, because they are four very different personalities, for the four main characters, and it's like Brainstorm in particular, that's always an interesting one. So it's for like in certainly like the comics, and even in like the Rebirth, kind of Brainstorm was sort of the chatty one because he was the smart one that had all the ideas. And so, yeah, it's sort of it's nice to see him getting a bit of time. And I whether it was kind of pre-planned or was kind of like rushed in as a like, hey, we need to give the other characters a bit more of a boost because we're spending too much time with Chromedome. I don't know, but it does round things out a bit more to to get us to see a bit more of them beyond just them in action.
Yeah, and it is interesting to see it happen as well, because there were definitely a few episodes, like in the US continuity, where there was, a bit of squabbling amongst Autobots, but nothing to this degree, and nothing like what we then see a few moments later when basically a fight nearly just properly breaks out between three Headmasters before the planets come into view.
Yeah, and I mean, again, as mentioned throughout this series, like the Autobots have not always been on it in this show, as they often are in the US continuity. Like there have been flaws and cracks in their kind of organization all the way through this. Like hence several planets being blown up.
Now, at this point in the episode, after that scene I just mentioned and the near fight that we got, this is the point where Galvatron is wiping out the planet's defenses. Chromedome literally saying, because the Autobots are in orbit now, "Look! Galvatron attacked while you were talking!" Fortress's response being, "Stop arguing! Twinstar will only suffer more if we do nothing." Now, this makes everyone aware of Twinstar's situation. Now, what is the situation, you ask? The fact that it is 2 planets, basically, is the way to sum that up. We've got Sperity and Toluon, like I mentioned, or Toluin, sorry. And Brainstorm described them looking like heaven and hell. Like, they're both very different, to say the least. One is definitely more favourable than the other, you might say. Fortress, at this point, instructs RC to take Wheelie and Daniel to the Barrent Toluin planet to keep them out of harm's way. Wheelie retorts to this, Andy, by simply going, "I'm sure we can be useful." To which I thought, lies.
Yeah, like we've seen Daniel's attempts at being useful, as has Fortress at this point. And like you'll be more useful just on the barren planet, thanks.
Honestly, Daniel was basically the most useful he's been in the last episode.
Yeah.
That's because he didn't do a lot.
Exactly.
It's made clear that they, being the Headmasters, will not take children into battle, and also because it would put the entire team at a disadvantage. This is when Brainstorm decides to accompany RC, Wheelie, and Daniel to the planet Toluin, which Chromedome immediately interprets as cowardice on Brainstorm's part. Brainstorm then just says, quote unquote, "I won't fight with people I disagree with. It's just asking for trouble." So again, Andy, really kind of ramping up this dissension among them now.
It also feels like there's a little bit of needle there that is like Brainstorm's going to go hang out with RC as well. Like there's a very clear kind of like shot there of just like Chromedome looking a bit annoyed about like, hang on, how come you get to hang out with RC and I don't? I have made a mistake here.
Well, that's compounded further actually, because Chromedome is still agitated and is just being a bit of a pain in the arse at this point, a bit like a petulant child. And then this comes to a screeching halt when RC agrees with Brainstorm's idea. And you just get that moment where I just wrote, Chromedome is sad. So in a weird way, that was, like you said, the fact that he got to hang out with RC, that's the moment where he just went, oh, I messed up.
Yeah.
And he sort of had that first realization. Now, down on the surface of planet Sperity, Scorponok has landed and the Decepticons just begin ransacking everything, looking for energy. Before long, the Autobots then arrive and a battle begins. We see transformations aplenty, including a full transformation once again by Scorponok, which sans maybe very quickly in the last episode, Andy. We really haven't seen Scorponok do the full transformation in quite a while. So it is kind of nice to see that again.
Yeah. I mean, I guess he's sort of only been around for a few episodes in the grand scheme of things, but again, yeah, we've not seen it since his big reveal, really. So no, always good to see.
Now, another thing I wanted to bring up about this is a recurring theme with Scorponok and Maximus is that they battle each other. More specifically, it's Scorponok engaging in battle with the flying battleship Maximus. Given that Scorponok has what I will just call like a root robot style mode, if you will, as well as the Scorpion mode, sorry, and the base mode, Fortress Maximus can't do that. So it's a very bad design choice to only be a base and a battleship, and then you need a supreme amount of energy to then transform into your giant robot mode.
Yeah, I mean it is a bit of an oversight, but you know.
Especially when Scorponok could just do it on a whim, seemingly.
Yeah, it's also surprising. Like, just simply as a narrative choice when you're trying to sell the toy, you know, as we have seen with Six Shot, like there's always a desire to show all of the modes as often as possible. So it is an interesting decision to be like we're gonna Banjax his robot mode, so that it can only be shown on occasion. Maybe there was a feeling of like, well, maybe less is more, and that, you know, we won't show it too often so that it's super special when it happens. So you should buy if you want to see Fortress Maximus in robot mode more, buy the toy, kids. Maybe there's like reverse psychology there, but yeah, it's definitely like a pretty big exception from normal Transformers behavior of just like always show both the modes or all of the modes.
So we come to find out that this battle that is going on is being observed, as a TF Wiki put it, by the Twin Star Council. Now, these are a group of robots with very similar designs, but specifically different colour schemes. I almost likened it, Andy, to them just being different members of a Star Trek bridge crew.
Yeah. There's that definite, very obvious, just like, yeah, we are colour-coded.
Now, we see a little bit of a discussion going on between council members because they want to evacuate the planet, and they're very keen on doing this. When it comes to the planet's defenses, there's a little bit of an interesting tidbit here because seemingly all the defenses that we saw attacking the Decepticons were all being manned by the robots, and we then see that all personnel are told by the council to switch to automatic mode and then start evacuating. This is when, it should be noted, that we see both the Combiners, that being Predaking for the Decepticons, and Raiden of the Trainbots join the battle. How did Raiden show up? We'll get to that in a few moments. But the Headmasters take the opportunity to try out their new, as the subtitles put it, Andy, the bird jump technique. Which, as the dialogue says and as the TF Wiki notes it, is triple jump. Which is also not exactly a good name for it, in hindsight.
No, I mean, that's an Olympic sport, not a thing Transformers do.
But it's a cool little thing, though, actually, that being said. It's a little bit ludicrous, because this is going to sound really weird phrasing it like this. The Headmasters power up by exchanging their heads. And then they effectively just launch Chromedome into the air, like it's two people with... So, Chromedome's standing on their arms, if you will, and the two sets of arms just launch him in the air. You sometimes see it maybe with, like, parkour teams trying to elevate someone up a wall and whatnot. That was the first thought that came to mind. And, basically, Chromedome does a big somersault in the air. He's attached to Hardhead's transector at this point, and basically just does what he calls the triple master kick, which is a double foot stomp. And he does it to each of the Decepticon Headmasters, and I genuinely thought, Andy, I was stuck in a time loop or something, because these were the exact same pieces of animation, except for the transformer that he lands on.
Yeah, I mean, the beauty of cell animation. You can just reuse the Chromedome bits over and over again and just switch out the cell underneath.
During everything I've been discussing, I mentioned that the Trainbots showed up. How did they show up? Why did they show up? Well, I can only answer the how part, everyone, because we have no idea why the Trainbots were there, because it's the first time they've been acknowledged in a few episodes. But they have basically taken the party with RC, Brainstorm, Daniel, and Wheelie to Toluin. The narrator describes the planet as a deserted planet, and as we see them land, we can see it's kind of a bit like a barren wasteland, quite frankly. And then the Trainbots leave to go help Fortress and Co. on Sperity. So that's how the Trainbots get involved in all this. Why is Predaking there? Don't know. They're just there. Sorry, folks. I'm telling you what I see.
And where were the Trainbots last episode? Were they stuck in the toilet? Like, what was the deal here?
Were they stuck in the cargo bay? You know.
Yeah. Like leaves on the line and Planet Beehive. Who can say?
It becomes clear very quickly that life on Toluin would be very hard, and surviving on the planet would be even harder. After a brief search, they find a cave, that being RC and Co., to take refuge in. Now, Daniel's trying to, just pass the time and whatnot, and then they all see a strange little animal crawling towards the mouth of the cave. And by a strange animal, I mean a toy robot. RC's immediate reaction is, wait, this planet actually is inhabited? They then follow this toy to a tall rock where they discover a young boy robot, which, per the TF Wiki, Andy, the robot's name is Clang. Which I'm guessing that's in the dialogue script. I don't think we actually ever heard that name, but I thought I'd make a note of it.
Yeah, it's a good robot name. I'll take it.
And they follow him into the depths of, I guess, another cave. Maybe the cave they're in. It's not really very clear. And then they find a secret door. More specifically, Daniel finds a secret door, because of course he does. They descend a long, dark staircase downwards, underground. And then they discover a hidden city, to which seemingly all of the Twin Star inhabitants and their energy supplies have been secretly moved to, with what we come to find out, Andy, is a connecting giant sort of tunnel, if you will, between the two planets, which as a visual is a really cool thing.
Yeah, it's pretty nice. It's a nice concept.
Brainstorm's reaction to seeing everyone there being, I see, it's a refuge for emergency evacuations. Now at this point, the Autobots and co. are captured by the Twin Star security because, they did a really good job, i.e. not, at hiding. And they are brought before of a commander who is well aware of the Transformers, and their tone isn't exactly a thrilling one, as it were, to see that they're on their planet. Part of the dialogue exchange includes Daniel saying, "Is your energy safe? The Decepticons?" Then the commander butts in and says, "That is none of your business." Daniel then says, "None of my business? So the energy is in this underground city?" The commander immediately says, "How do you know?" And then Daniel has to go, a hunch?
or saying probably like imagine Brainstorm being there, just be like, "Shh, don't shut up, Daniel.
You're not meant to know.
You're making this worse."
After figuring that all the fighting on Sperity is for nothing, because all the energy's been transferred over to Tolowin, RC and Wheelie actually offer to effectively stay as hostages on the planet in order for the commander to let Brainstorm go and help the other Headmasters. Now, because of this offer, this selfless offer, let's say, Andy, the Autobots wins the commander's trust, and then Brainstorm at that point goes to inform the other Autobots. But of course, Daniel didn't offer to stay as a hostage, so he wants to go with Brainstorm, who basically has to go, "Daniel, it's too dangerous. Just stop this, alright? Please." And then Daniel effectively mutters to himself going, "The fighting's much more dangerous." It's like, child, what are you doing? Stop it. At this point, we get our first proper glimpse of the connecting tunnel between the two planets. They sort of have like a big car system where you can ride it and such. We don't get to see much of it, Andy, but just as a concept and seeing it in action, it's just a really cool idea. I really like it.
Yeah. I mean, much like, Planet Beehive also, just like, they put some effort into this stuff. It's a shame we'll never see it again after this episode, no doubt. But at least they put the hours in and had some interesting thoughts. Because again, this could have just been a generic like planet and its moon or something like that, and maybe they had a space bridge that hasn't been blown up or something. But they put some effort in, and I appreciate that.
Back on planet Sperity, as a result of the evacuation, Galvatron's Six Shot and Sound Blaster, plus Andy, want to make sure I mention it, Rumble and Frenzy!
Yes, I was very excited to see those two guys for a hot minute.
Quite literally, because they've been unable to find any energy, and Galvatron starts getting angry. It's almost like we're back in Season 3 territory at this point. He says, "We've not found the energy, and the battle's not going our way. You're all useless." Also, he then just randomly shouts after, "You and your stupid ideas, Scorponok." To which my thought was, this was your idea, Galvatron.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to think that is a deliberate thing and not just some badly written dialogue that is just he's just blaming Scorponok for things that are clearly his fault. But yeah, I do enjoy Galvatron's motivational speeches to his team. You're all useless. You suck.
But you know what else he does to rally his troops? When he decides, I'm going to go and attack Fortress head on. But no pun intended there. So he literally just jumps onto on Battleship Maximus and just starts firing with his arm cannon. And I'm just thinking, this is not good. Yeah, this is not good, Fortress.
There's some peak Galvatron in this episode, for sure.
This is when Brainstorm has now arrived on the planet. And he's sort of, the way I'll describe it, he's running out of the station, if you will, from where the connecting tunnel is. And he is addressed by the actual only character that is outright named in this episode, Andy, in the actual dialogue, by Darthna, or as the TF Wiki put it, Dafuna. The reason that he meets them is because apparently he has a message from their, council to give to Fortress, basically. Now, with that being said, Brainstorm is immediately held at bay by the Horrorcons, and when he's appealing for help from his colleagues, the Headmasters, Chromedome just says, quote-unquote, "He's only just come on the scene, leave him." And I'm just thinking, Chromedome, you git! What the heck?
yeah, it's I enjoy that, especially out of an Autobot, just kind of getting a bit of sass. It's we don't get this very often. Gonna make the most of this.
After a further argument with his fellow headmasters, Brainstorm... I don't know really how to describe this, Andy, so I'm just going to read what I wrote down here verbatim. Brainstorm gets his fellow headmasters to repeatedly exchange heads with him, transplanting his own head from transector to transector, so he is then on the other side of the battlefield to then run to Battleship Maximus to tell Fortress the message. It was really difficult to describe that, but it's actually a pretty cool idea and I liked it.
Yeah. I mean, if nothing else, this episode really goes to the races with the whole like head swapping thing. It just goes for like the Guinness World Record for like most head swaps in one episode. And yeah, like it's a fun use of that whole idea. And yeah, like there was a moment of just like what is even going on here? I've just lost track. It's like that trick you do where you put like, you know, you've got a bunch of cups and only one has a dice under it or whatever, and you're trying to follow which one you're supposed to be paying attention to. It felt a bit like that, but with Headmasters.
But now, what was the message that Sperity wanted to give to Maximus? Simply, it's that Sperity is a decoy, and that a giant siren will sound when the evacuation is complete. And then Brainstorm tells Fortress that that's when they should strike? Which, in hindsight, Andy, I think was either a poor translation or bad dialogue, because that's not what happens.
Yeah. I'm not quite sure. Not quite sure what the deal was there.
So now, seemingly aware of the Twin Star government's plan for the planets, which I'm going to admit, Andy, in hindsight, I was not ready for what this plan is, because when it happened, I thought, wait, what? But I digress once again. Fortress has the Autobots pull out when the sirens sound, signifying that the evacuation has been completed. At which point, Sound Blaster wins Decepticon of the Day award because he finds a tiny little puny stack of Energon cubes, which Galvatron kicks over in a rage, and they sound like broken glass when he kicks them, it should be said. So, yeah, despite Sound Blaster finding it, it's not much of an energy reserve. I guess the inhabitants thought, we'll leave them a prize if they find these, you know. It's a little prize.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, it makes sense, because if you left nothing behind, then that kind of they get rumbled, to use that phrase again, is because then it's going to be like, well, wait, the energy's gone somewhere, so I guess it's probably on the other planet. But if you leave a small amount, then it's like, oh, well, I guess we found the energy and this is all there is, so it was a waste of time. So I like that. It's a good plan.
At this moment, the planet begins to shudder, that being Sperity, as we, the viewer, Andy, suddenly see Toluin disconnect from the cable bridge between the two planets and just starts floating off it somewhere else into space.
Yeah, that's how the universe works. That's science.
Now, unaware that the departing Toluin planet is actually the planet holding all the energy that they're seeking, after just feeling so infuriated with how much time they have wasted and unwilling to be made of a fool of any longer, Galvatron basically just says, right, we're done, let's go, I've had enough. And then we go to Toluin, and the Autobots celebrate their victory, and we see Chromedome, Hardhead, and Brainstorm effectively kind of make peace, as it were, before they set off for the Decepticons once again. And the make peace is basically, let's not talk about that. Sorry, mate, we'll do better next time. That's basically what it is. It's like, you didn't hash this out.
Yeah. This is just kicking the can down the curb. This is all going to come back to bite you again at some point.
And of course, there's me thinking, okay, so the planet's disconnected. All of the energy and inhabitants are on the far more desolate-looking planet. What happened to the other one?
I mean, maybe just once the Decepticons have gone home, maybe they just go back again.
It's put the planet in reverse.
Yeah. Like, why not? I mean, remember that episode where, like, Galvatron tried to turn Cybertron into a big spaceship? Like, maybe that's, like, the deal with this planet as well.
I would hate to be the guy that's got to manage the docking of that tunnel, though, back on the planet.
Yeah, it's probably kind of tricky.
But the episode is not done, because we are on the bridge of Battleship Maximus. The episode now concludes with Maximus having left the separated Toluin planet's orbit, and the following conversation on the bridge takes place. Chromedome says, It's time to topple Galvatron. And then Fortress responds with, no. There could be terrible consequences if we lose him. Which I think was meant to be maybe lose to him, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, because I part of me kind of thought maybe they mean lose him as in like tailing him across the galaxy. But then also it's like, does he also mean like if Galvatron gets usurped as Decepticon leader, then the alternative is worse? Like that was kind of what I settled on, is that I think maybe that's to say like actually Zarak/Scorponok as leader would be even worse, so let's not upset the current balance of things. But it's a little bit unclear.
Yeah, and to add credence to what you just said there, the dialogue continues with Hardhead saying, terrible consequences, and Fortress ending the episode before the narrator comes in saying, I can't say for sure, but the universe may be turned on its head. And then the narrator says, Twin Star is safe, but what terrible consequences is Fortress thinking about? And what could Galvatron possibly be plotting? So based on that dialogue, Andy, I think it's a fair assumption to say that and also, quite frankly, based on what we saw earlier in the series, if Scorponok/Zarak is leader, he's far more reliable than Galvatron.
Yeah, and also, like, from Fortress's own perspective, like, he knows way more about, like, what Zarak/Scorponok is capable of. So, like, it makes sense that would be his preoccupation as well. And yeah, like you say, in terms of results, Galvatron ain't all that. So yeah, that it definitely makes sense. It's an interesting little tidbit to end the episode with.
And with that being said, Andy, we now venture to the TF Wiki to see maybe if there's some additional little details that might help us piece together a few bits of info, or maybe just some interesting info in general. So, continuity notes. This episode is the first to make reference to the master plan, in air quotes, that Galvatron has for the energy that the Decepticons are gathering throughout the story arc. What is the plan? Some of you may be asking. We'll find out later in the series.
What if it's a master plan and they go back to Planet Master?
Oh my god. I've not thought of that. I wonder.
No, well, I wouldn't be surprised if we do end up back there at some point, but I'm not quite sure that's what he's referring to. But that would just be a really good pivot. It's like, I told you I had a master plan, and here we are.
If it's that literal, I will laugh so hard.
I mean, look, we literally have a thing in this series called Head On, so, all bets are off.
So, this episode features the return of the Headmasters cross-head-on technique, but with a twist, as we talked about. Instead of directly swapping heads, the Headmasters first link hands in small robot mode to pool their energies before connecting to each other's transectors. The narrator explains that by entering this power-up formation, in air quotes, they triple their own individual energies, presumably because there were 3 of them doing it. In particular, this bit of terminology foreshadows something later in the series. So let's keep that in mind. There are a bunch of animation and technical errors noted here. I'm not going to go into massive detail on them, as it were. Quite frankly, I'm not going to go into any detail. So if you want to read them, folks, head over to the TF Wiki's page for this episode. You can indulge in them yourselves. Continuity errors. Fortress tells Daniel and Wheelie that it's too dangerous to have them on board Maximus during a fight, which is great, except that it doesn't seem to have bothered him at any other point in the series. Yeah. If there's so much a liability, why bring them on the voyage in the first place?
I mean, that is the question, is it not?
The next note. How did everyone manage to not notice the significance of the giant tube connecting the 2 planets? Which is very true. Was it necessary to do that slow and overly complicated head-switching thing in order to deliver Fortress a message? The Headmasters have previously shown they have telepathic powers.
I did think that, like, could you not just do the telepathy thing again? But I don't know, something energy levels, I'm sure.
Not to mention that both sides have had communicators for the longest time. It's even a specific job for 2 of them. So, an interesting trivia note here. This episode originally aired in Japan as part of a triple bill alongside 2 other episodes which we have not yet seen, Andy. Foreign localization. The Omni Productions English dub named this episode The Attack of the Twin Planets.
Okay.
That's incorrect.
Yeah. The planets are not attacking anything, so...
So the Shout Factory release had 2 different names for this. In the subtitles, it was Battle for Defense of the False Planet. And what is the difference between these? The menu had something different, apparently. Battle for Defense of the False Planet. They're both exactly the same. Why are these 2 different notes, TF Wiki? Sorry, I don't often call you out, but why? So, in a holdover from the Metrodome subtitles, the set that we're watching, Dafuna is mangled into Darthna. Okay, that makes sense. I thought that may have just actually been the translation, but seemingly that was just the name that our Metrodome set went with.
Yeah.
In Spanish, the name of this episode is not what I was expecting. It translates as Attack on the Gemini Planet.
Okay.
Just the look on your face then was priceless.
I don't know where they pulled the whole Gemini bit from, but it sounds good, so why not?
In Italian, this was translated as Twin Star, the Double Planet.
Yeah, I quite like that.
And in Mandarin, this episode translates as Battle for Defense of the Double Planets, True and False.
That's also kind of works.
I quite like it. It's cool. But with that being said, everybody, that's going to wrap up us talking about episode 20. Andy, before we start to wrap up things proper, did you have any additional notes on the episode you would like to impart on our wonderful audience?
I have one question. Do you think Twin Star has exorcists?
Okay, I was wondering if we were going to bring this up because, folks, based on our past professional endeavors, we have dealt with an anime series called Twin Star Exorcist. So as soon as I saw the name Twin Star appear in this episode, I could not think of I could not think, if that makes sense, of Twin Star Exorcist throughout multiple points in this episode.
Yeah, likewise. So yeah, I had to get it out there somehow.
I'm glad you did in hindsight, so there we go. So with that being said, everybody, the next time we are doing a podcast, which will be available in a few weeks' time from when this episode is published, we will be delving into episodes 21 and 22 of Transformers Headmasters, which, Andy, have the following episode titles. 21 is Find Scorponok's Weak Spot.
Oh, well, I think I know where that is now.
And then episode 22, Head Formation of Friendship.
That's perhaps the most Japanese episode title we've had in this series so far. I love it.
So, folks, there are some interesting screenshots I'm seeing, which I'm not going to delve into, but I think we're in for an interesting ride. And as mentioned, I think those 2 episodes were part of that sort of double bill, triple bill showing. In fact, yes, it was, Andy. So we will conclude the double bill showing, the triple bill, I said it again, in our next podcast. So we had that to look forward to.
Yeah. If only we'd known, we could have made it a triple bill ourselves. But
hindsight's a wonderful thing, isn't it?
It's sort of an interesting point in the series to play the whole triple bill idea. I wonder whether that was a specific idea around these episodes or whether it was more of a weird TV station has a slot to fill, please just give us a bunch of episodes at once. Because I mean, maybe it will all make sense when we watch them, but given everything that's been said about this particular arc, this doesn't necessarily feel like a point where you'd be wanting to go with a triple bill. But I don't know. Given these episode titles, I can also see maybe it makes sense.
Yeah, I'm trying to I'm just trying to think, because in some of the previous episodes, there was a gap between the next arc starting, wasn't there? So there was a good few weeks gap, so maybe this was just a way of making up a few weeks of TV, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, maybe they did just have to play catch up. Yeah, I feel like watching these episodes will answer whether there was some kind of deliberate purpose to this. Anime sometimes has double length episodes when it it's a 2-parter that sits better as a single episode. So I was kind of curious whether it's that kind of deal or whether it is just a TV station convenience point. But I guess we'll find out.
Or maybe someone just went, look, not being funny, can we get through these Monster of the Week episodes a lot quicker?
Yeah.
We'll do it all in one day.
Yeah, the animators aren't struggling enough, so let's move up the schedule.
Oh my god, I hadn't thought of it from that perspective. Oh, that's horrid.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine they must have been significantly far enough ahead to at least not have that concern to agree to do a triple bill. But yeah, knowing how the animation industry works, especially in Japan, like I can imagine a fraught conversation there of like, so we've got good news and bad news. It's just like, good news is, the next 3 episodes, the TV station really excited about them. Bad news, they want them all at the same time.
And the animators are like, oh.
Yeah, the really bad news, that's next week.
Oh, oh my word. But folks, there we go. I think that's going to wrap it up for today. Thank you very much for listening. If you enjoyed the show, make sure you tell a friend. We'd really appreciate it. You can find us on Instagram and Twitter under the name Starscreams Pod. If you want to find our Patreon page, which we don't charge any money for, it's just like a long-term audio archive solution, to be completely honest. It's patreon.com/StarscreamsGhost. As mentioned earlier in the episode as well, all of our podcasts are archived on YouTube in video form. So if you want to watch us talk about all of these episodes, you can simply just search for Starscream's Ghost Podcast on YouTube. You should find us just fine. Andy, before we go, any other closing thoughts or any randomness that has occurred during these episodes that you want to impart on our wonderful audience before we wrap up?
No, I don't think so. We're moving on to episode 42, the meaning of life, etc., etc. So excited to see what the meaning of our life is for watching this much Transformers.
Hey, you know what? I'm not complaining. I'm having a laugh.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I'm definitely like these 2 episode titles have intrigued me, so I'm looking forward to the next one.
There we go, folks. Thank you very much for listening once again. We'll be back in a few weeks' time with our next episode. So until then, from myself, Jeremy Graves, from him, Mr. Andy Hanley, we've been Starscream's Ghost, a Transformers podcast. Take care and speak to you soon.
Bye, everyone.